is Kevin Winters, and I want to do something a little different. Today, I want to answer a question. One of the things I love to do is answer questions. So, if y'all have questions, please don't be afraid to put them in the comments, or you can email me at doinglifeonfire@yahoo.com. That's doinglifeonfire@yahoo.com. I like to answer questions so much that some of the people who are following this ministry, you're following it because I was trolling on the internet and saw that you had some type of question, and I decided to jump in and answer it, and it just led you back to my ministry. And that's because I like to answer questions. So please don't be afraid to ask any. One of uh, Let me say this. One of the reasons I like answering questions is because if you're asking a question, number one, you want to know an answer. It means you're in a position to receive. That's number one. Because it's nothing like sharing information with somebody who doesn't want the information, right? So when somebody asks a question, it's because they want to know. And that's a good place to be in. So that's why I don't mind answering questions. And the other thing is, if you're asking a question, it's because you're unclear. So the picture in your mind of what you're trying to accomplish is not clear. And so the point of answering the question is to bring clarity. And since my ministry is focused on clarity, I like to do that. So let me answer this question from somebody that asked a question on YouTube a few weeks ago. It says, does God use things repetitively? Like, say, if you keep seeing a word or number over and over, is that God, or could it be the devil? Let me start by saying, if you follow my ministry, you know that I'm going to talk about discernment. So, let me answer the latter part of the question first. Yes, it can be the enemy. Only reason I'm saying that is because there are no there are few instances where the Bible presents supernatural people operating outside of the presence of their evil counterpart. For example, when you see Moses going into Egypt, he is doing miracles, and guess what happens? The witches and warlocks come out. The Bible calls them the mad magicians. They come out, they throw their sticks on the ground, they become serpents too. And so what you see is the magicians and the miracle workers all hanging out together. When you look at Daniel, you'll see that Daniel is called a man of great wisdom. It's clear that he had the spirit of God for great wisdom. That wisdom allowed him to interpret dreams and do and to be a phenomenal administrator. And where was he housed? Where was his ministry? What was he? Where did he live? He lived among the wise men, who were another type of astrologers or sign interpreters and those kind of people who read the times and were supposed to understand dreams and stuff like that. When you look at let's see, we did Moses, we did Daniel. When you look at the prophets, you will frequently see the prophets among excuse me, the diviners, right? And so there's always a mismatch of supernatural phenomenon happening at any given moment. And that's okay. So the latter half of the answer to your question is, can it be the enemy? Yes, it can. For that reason, I do a lot of teaching on discernment. You won't read an article of mine where I don't touch on some level of discernment. You won't see video series of mine where I won't touch on some level of discernment. You won't read a book of mine where I don't touch on some level of discernment, because it's that important of an issue. It's not as important to experience the supernatural as it is to know what you're experiencing when you do experience the supernatural. A lot of people are walking around these days saying, God won't give you a fish, a rock, if you ask for a fish. My experience has been most people don't know the difference between the rock and the fish. So it's not about whether God will give you a rock or a fish. If you ask God for a certain thing, God's going to give you that certain thing. The problem is, do you know the difference between rocks and fish? I have experienced believers, and quite a few actually, who don't. And If there was no concern for being deceived, then there wouldn't be so many scriptures in the New Testament that refer to it. Jesus wouldn't warn us about false prophets. Um, Jesus talks about false prophets. Paul wouldn't say test the spirits to see if they are of God. Paul wouldn't say in Corinthians 14 that let two or three prophets speak and let the others what judge. You wouldn't have standards that require discernment except that discernment was necessary. So don't take it wrong and don't get down on yourself about the fact that yes, Satan can do this. So don't let that part discourage you. It's okay. You know, one thing I tell people, you look at Jesus' life in Luke 4. Jesus himself is experiencing Satan. Satan is trying to deceive God. Y'all see that? He's trying to deceive God. So it's okay. If he'll try to deceive God, he'll try to deceive you too. So it's okay. One thing I always say, you can't control what's going to happen. That's why you have to discern. You can't stop Satan from giving you dreams. You can't stop him from giving you visionary experiences. You can't stop him from giving you false revelation. You can't stop him from those things because he is a person with his own mind and God gives him freedom to do the things that he's doing, at least for right now. And so for that reason, the Bible tells us to be a people of discernment. Hebrews 5 tells us that solid food belongs to those who are of full age, who have by reason of use exercised their senses to learn to discern not between, but both good and evil. In other words, a mature believer can identify good and they can identify evil. So don't be discouraged by that answer. Yes, it can be a issue of, so you have to purpose, and because of that reason you have to purpose to learn how to discern. I have great books, great videos, great articles on the website. You have access to a lot of tools, and there are a lot of people who've written great books. Mine is called God Is That You, Me, or the Devil. It's a great resource. I wrote it. The question suggests that I was having a problem. That's the question I used to ask all the time. Every time God said something to me, God, is that you? Is that me? Was that the devil? And so I went with that title because it resonates with a lot of people have that same question, no matter when God asks them something. Is that you, me, or the devil? So the book is written to help you discern. The other book, You Can Hear the Voice of God Clearly, is not written for discernment. It's written to help you hear clearly. So it wants you to go from hearing a faint whisper and sitting on the floor for hours trying to figure out if it's God or not, to hearing something very clear and distinct, to seeing clearly and distinct, to have clear impressions, and what hinders you from experiencing clarity in your communication with God. That's what that book is for. So, but the first book is written for discernment, and it's okay. It's okay that Satan's going to try. You're just going to discern as him and move him out the way. Now, so yes, that's the second part. I answered that question. Does God do things repetitively? Yes, God does things repetitively. It is a part of God's nature that is very reassuring to a lot of people. Now, I have to say this. God does things repetitively. They fall into two different categories. There's God repeating himself, and there is confirmation. A lot of times we assume they're one and the same. They're actually not one and the same. They're two distinct, different ways of God communicating. Sometimes God repeats himself. For instance, Abraham, God told him he would be the father of many nations, right? He told him that, and then some time passes and he tells him that again, and then Abraham makes a baby and God tells him again, and then he finally gives him the child. So God has repeated this message to Abraham. He's not confirmed it. He's just merely repeated himself. When God repeats himself, it's because he's trying to remind you of something, or he's expressing urgency, right? So the other example of this is when Pharaoh has two dreams back to back, right? So he says that Joseph says it's to establish that these things are going to happen. What he means is this is urgent. So it's the same way that if your parent, and if you are a parent, you really understand. If you say to your child, "Hey, come get these toys off the floor," and then 5 minutes go past, and you say, "Come get these toys off the floor," and again you say, "Come get these toys off the floor," right? We know by the fact that you are increasing in intensity. The intensity increases means that there's more weight to what's being said because it's happened repetitively. It's different from saying, "Hey, come get your toys off the floor." And then you wait all day till you come back from work. "Hey, come get your toys off the floor." There's a difference between that than repeating yourself succinctly, right? If you keep repeating something, then you know that the person is trying to give you an urgency. Now, in the second case example I gave, where I said you say it in the morning, that is repeating yourself to remind you. So in Pharaoh's case, God is saying this is urgent. You need to listen. This is important, right? He's establishing how important it is by repeating himself. But he didn't confirm it. He was just repeating himself. But then with Moses' life, he's reminding Moses. He's not speaking to the issue of urgency. He's just reminding him because it's easy to get discouraged between the time God tells you something and the time it comes to pass. You're going to get discouraged, or it's easy to forget. It's easy to get distracted. All of those things happen. And so because of that, God repeats himself. And then you want God to repeat himself. It's very important for God to repeat himself. It helps keep you on track. He does it in the life of Jonah. "Jonah, I want you to go to speak to the people of Nineveh." Jonah didn't want to go speak to the people of Nineveh, so God put a storm in the situation. Jonah understood that that was from God. That was God repeating himself. It was God saying, "You better go where I told you to go." And then there was a fish that swallowed him up that God created for him. Something in nature. Again, God was repeating himself. "You better go where I told you to go." And then when he got out, God reminded him, "Go where I told you to go and do what I told you to do." Because he was in the position of being disobedient and God was repeating himself. But again, God didn't confirm anything. He was merely repeating himself. The second way that God uses his communication system is that God uses what we call confirmation. Now, a lot of times we lump everything into one big category. So we start seeing the same thing over and over again. We say God is confirming the word. But that's not how God confirms the word, by repeating himself over and over again. God repeating himself over and over again because either you're disobedient, he's trying to remind you, or he's trying to get your attention. That's why he's repeating himself. Now, when we start talking about confirmation, confirmation is what God does to establish faith in the heart of people regarding something that he has told them to do or something he has said is going to happen. So, when you look in I believe it's the book of Kings, there is a prophet who comes and prophesies against, I believe, King Jeroboam about King Josiah coming. And he prophesies about this king, and it says he gives him a declaration about what God has said, and then as a sign, he says, "And the altar is going to split." And the altar did, in fact, split. When the altar split, everybody knew this was the word of the Lord. So faith comes to confirmations come to establish faith in doubting hearts. It is God's way of, forgive the phrase, but peeing on his spot, or or put his seal of approval on something. And you're going to see that there is a difference between the repetitive voice of God and God merely confirming. Same thing happens with Samuel. When Samuel tells King Saul that he's going to be king, he tells him, "You're going to be the next king." And then he says, "And these signs shall follow." And then there's certain things happen, right? And then it says, "And all of these signs came to pass that day." The signs were there to establish faith in the heart of King Saul about the word that Samuel had spoken into his life. The Bible ends by saying in Mark 16 that that the disciples went out preaching the word everywhere, and it says, and the Lord went with them, confirming their words with signs and wonders. Confirming, establishing. Well, what were their words? It was the gospel of salvation. It was the message of salvation. So God used confirmation to establish faith in doubting hearts. You understand that? So there's a difference between when God repeats himself, and there's a difference between confirmation. So these are another level of discernment that you have to establish. So you have to establish, is this thing from God, number one? And then you have to figure out, is it merely God repeating himself? Is he trying to get my attention? Am I discouraged and he's trying to encourage me to keep going? Am I being disobedient and he's trying to get my attention? Or is this urgent? Is this urgent? Now let me say this about these two systems. God's always going to repeat himself because it's so important to get people to do that. It's a communication system, it's part of his communication system. Confirmations, on the other hand, as you grow in your ability to hear from God, confirmations will not be as big a part of your experience. Because what did I say confirmation was for? Confirmations are for establishing faith in doubting hearts. Sometimes God will tell us something that's so huge that he's going to confirm it because you won't believe it if he doesn't. Other times, God is going to just tell you things to do and just merely repeat itself. And you just have to learn how to be confident and comfortable with enough with the voice of God where you're not relying on confirmations all the time. Because confirmations will be crippling when you want God to use you in ministry. You won't be able to prophesy because you won't be certain that it's from God. Right? So they help us on one hand, they cripple us on the other hand if we're not careful to graduate into a place of really having confidence in God and knowing that voice so that what he wants us to do, we can hear it and simply do it without needing confirmations or God to repeat itself 1,000 times. So I'm not going to go into a whole lot about that now, but I will tell you, you won't experience confirmations forever. I get no confirmations. I get very few confirmations. Because in the end, the Bible says this in Deuteronomy 13, if there's a prophet among you, or Deuteronomy 18, it says one of the ways you're going to know that the word that came from God is that it came to pass. So the confirmation is that the thing that God said actually happens. So when you get to a certain place in your walk, like I don't get a lot of confirmations because I hear from God. I know that it's God. I do it and it comes to pass. And that is the confirmation. And when I try to stall God, he doesn't pay me any real mind. He just flat out tells me, you know it's me. Do what I told you to do. And then, sometimes I don't want to do what he tells me to do, like everybody else. So that's how I want to answer that question. But yes, God does use repetitive things. Yes, Satan can do the same thing too. Don't let that worry you. Just go ahead and grow and learn how to discern which one is God and which one is not. Then you have to ask yourself, if God is repeating himself, why is he repeating himself? Is he trying to get my attention? Am I being disobedient? Am I discouraged and he's trying to encourage me to keep moving forward? And then you have to figure out if it's confirmation. If it's confirmation, you'll know because God will have already said something to you. And now the confirmation comes as a sign to establish faith in your heart for the thing that he's called you to do.